Hey there, this is Renessa Boley Layne, and welcome to another conversation on creating your perfect work. If you follow me, then you know I am all about helping you to discover, design, and get highly paid to do work you love, whether that means radically changing careers, launching a business, or bringing your big idea to life. And if you are considering radically changing careers, we're going to pull back the curtain for you today on the most effective strategies to be able to do that. And this awesome woman who is this beautiful, regal, amazing woman that's sharing the screen with me today, she is going to show you just how to do that. So I want to be really clear. If you're thinking about making a switch, whether that's switching roles or switching industries or both, this conversation is for you. If you fear that you don't present as the ideal candidate when you're thinking about the role that you want to switch into, this conversation is for you. And so let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Dawn Graham, because I've had the opportunity to speak with Dawn before, loved her content, wanted to re-engage her for this series because I think she's just gonna bring some gems for you. But let me tell you a little bit about her. And then I'm going to tell you why I really love her work. So Dr. Dawn Graham is a career switch coach. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a LinkedIn learning instructor and the host of a popular call-in show titled Dr. Dawn on Careers on Sirius XM Radio, channel 132. So plug into that. She's also a regular contributor on Forbes.com under the leadership channel. She's a career director for the executive MBA program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And her latest book, which is how I connected to Dawn, is called Switchers, How Smart Professionals Change Careers and Seize Success. And what's great about that book is that it combines her experience as a career coach, as a licensed psychologist, and a former corporate recruiter to really give career switchers the strategies that they need to really be successful in creating work that they love. Obviously, clearly, Dawn knows her stuff upside downs and backwards, right? But here's why I love her work and why you've got to plug all the way in to this conversation today. So what's great about Dawn is that she addresses the unique job search challenges that folks who are switching careers have. And that can be a little bit different than a traditional job seeker. She also teaches from the perspective of a recruiter and a psychologist. So get this, she will give you the insider secrets to understand the psychology of what's happening on the other side of the desk. Because you're dealing with human beings when we are interviewing and when we're doing all of that. And so the questions that hiring managers are asking themselves about you, you would want to know that. And the subconscious connections and assumptions that they're making about you, you would want to know that as well. So with that being said, I think she's got a lot of, she's loaded up with gems, and I want to welcome you, Dawn, and I'm so excited to be able to connect with you again on this platform. How are you doing?
I'm great, and what a wonderful, exciting intro, Renessa. I am so excited to talk about this topic. So thank you for that great ramp up to this.
Okay, so y'all pay attention. So here's the deal. So there's something that I don't know where I read it. It may be in a prior conversation that we had, but you talk about the fact that, you know, unconventional career moves are easier to make now than they ever were. Mm-hmm. And I think that would come as a surprise to a lot of people. I think they would think that it's a lot harder to make that switch. Why is now the perfect time to switch careers? Like, what? Explain.
I'm so glad you're starting there, because you're right. A lot of people are thinking I need to be very cautious now, and everything that's going on, I'm going to take a wait and see attitude. But there's really two sides to it, right, Renessa? It's one, we're all experiencing disruption personally right now, whether we have been furloughed or laid off, or we know people are, or our jobs have shifted with the market. So I think once you're already experiencing some type of disruption in your life, it's easier to kind of keep that momentum with the change. Because I think a lot of people, you know, change is scary, change is hard, change is ambiguous, but this is where we are right now. So I think the platform is giving us this nudge we might have been waiting for to make that change. I think the other thing that's really exciting about the time we're in is that recruiters and hiring managers are going to be very forgiving of gaps on our resumes, and everybody knows what happened in 2020. People are going to recognize that and not really necessarily dig into that. So and some of us have more time if you're not making a commute, and I know some of us have less time because we're managing 3 children, taking school classes, and lots of other things. But if you're one of those people who have more time, this could be a great opportunity to really ramp up your skills, get a certification in coding, whatever those things you've wanted to do but haven't been able to. So I think there's a lot of things happening right now that we can take advantage of. The other side of it, so that's kind of the personal reasons, but the other side of it is that the entire economy is being disrupted, and what we're seeing emerging, and this was already happening before the pandemic, but what has been kind of moving rapidly has just warp speed into new roles, hybrid roles, meaning that jobs are combining. There's going to be new industries coming out of this. Certainly, there's a lot of industries that we're going to lose because of this. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be forced to look at their current career trajectory and say, is this going to make sense for me for the long term? So I think there's a lot churning right now that we can kind of either ignore and say, I'm not going to look at that, I'm just going to wait and see, or we'd say, you know what, I'm really going to take advantage of this opportunity right now when a lot of people are making decisions to look at their careers and say, where are my transferable skills useful? What can I do differently? Where are my gaps so that I can close them? And where's the market going? So I think all of these things are in motion. And one of the things that makes this an easier time to make that switch is just stepping into that and embracing it.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said, because I think for a lot of folks, there's this idea that this is the time to play it safe and this is the time to hunker down. I'm of the mindset that A, there's never ever a perfect time. B, it doesn't mean that you go out and you're reckless, right? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there's a lot less competition out there in some ways, because you have a lot of people that have the mindset of, let me play it safe, let me recoil back, let me, this or that. Are you noticing, though, either through your radio show, through conversations that you're having, and it's not just because of COVID, because we happen to be having this conversation in the midst of COVID, but if we were to, rewind 6 months ago, it was a very different environment. Do you find that people are more open to career switching, just in general, than they were, say, 5 years ago, or whatever? Like, are you noticing from the employee standpoint, from the individual, that people are much more willing to take those risks? Or do you find that people are a lot more risk averse when it comes to making switches?
So from an employer perspective, what I will say why I wrote this book is because what we know is people have been making switches for a number of years now. This isn't new. What hasn't moved as quickly is the hiring process, which tends to look at traditional job seekers, meaning with applicant tracking systems that look for matches. So you need 5 years of marketing. Do you have 5 years of marketing? Or you need these keywords. So a lot of companies use these systems because they need a way to systematically kind of weed out candidates. So yeah, hiring hasn't caught up, but what's changing in the workforce is that companies are recognizing now that they need to hire differently, and they can't be hiring for necessarily headcount. They need to hire for project work and to get things done, and they need people who are agile and fluid and able to change with the market. And a lot of companies are recognizing right now, Renessa, that they don't have this agile workforce, so they haven't built it. And so as they're shifting to meet customer needs or moving to a virtual environment, they're recognizing a lot of these skills that they're lacking. So some companies are doing a great job at reskilling or upskilling their employees. Others are not as flexible in that regard, and they might be laying off and rehiring. But what I think you can do as a job seeker is kind of take advantage of all of this motion that's going on. And I've always said this, that regardless of whether you're making a traditional move or you're making a switch, you have to drive that process, meaning you have to do the work to rebrand yourself to the current market. Because even if you're staying in a job, that those skills continue to shift and morph and are going to do so at warp speed going forward. So for those out there who are saying, you know, I'm good, I like what I do, I'm not willing to take a risk, this is why I love this entire series that you're doing, Renessa, because this is all about taking control and not waiting for your industry to peter out and now you find yourself forced to make a move, or not waiting for, you know, somebody to tell you what you need to do, but actually looking at what's going on and saying, hey, this is a really good time to reinvent myself, to reach out to my contacts. And you know as well as I do, a lot of people are connecting now. We're connecting with dormant contacts, so the people we haven't talked to in a while. People are reaching out, they want to help you because we're all in this, even though we're all experiencing the pandemic, we're all impacted differently. So what a great time to build your network. What a great time to learn new skills. What a great time to show your agility. And if you're not ready to take that risk, one thing you might do is look around in your current organization and say, what can I get involved with? What projects can I do to build my resume so that I have the skills of the future on there? So can you raise your hand and say, I'd like to get involved in this transformation, or I have this skill set that hasn't been really fully utilized, but I see with the challenges we're experiencing due to the pandemic, it can really make a difference with our customers. So this is not the time to sit idle. And that's why I love this series, because it's all about seizing that moment.
Yeah, no, what I love about what you said is this idea of taking ownership and really driving the process. And whether you are actively wanting to make a switch or, you know, passively just, you know, I'm good for now, you have to own all of that from start to finish. You don't get to just put yourself out there or put your resume out there or tell somebody that you're interested in something and then just wait and see if the marketplace bites. Like, you have to be willing to, you know, say who you are in the marketplace, how you want to be perceived, what your experience means, all of those kinds of things you get to own and you get to define. And if we don't do that, then the market will define it for us. And oftentimes their definition is laced with whatever biases they bring to the table. And bias is not necessarily negative. It just is the lens with which anyone comes to the table and the lens with which they're making a judgment, right? And so you being able to drive that process is really, really critical. The other thing that you said that I thought was interesting is that there may be some folks listening and they're thinking about, well, maybe down the road I'll make a switch, or, you know, it's not imminent, right? You gotta be ready so that you don't have to get ready. And that's
so true.
Critical, because when you're ready to make the switch, if you're not prepared, it's almost too late to start getting prepared. Like, there's so much rework that you're gonna have to do to make catch up, right? Whereas if you're super proactive and you're owning your career, then you're taking those steps with ease and without being thirsty and without being, you know, all that kind of stuff that can have you repelling folks from, you know, supporting and helping and all that kind of good stuff. So there's a lot of nuggets that came out of what you said. But obviously, you know, at the Wharton School of Business, where you do some of your work, you're often coaching, you know, some of the brightest minds that are vying for some of the most highly competitive roles. But you share this concept in your book, this idea of identity clinging, and why it is such a roadblock to making a shift to creating work you love. Tell us more about that, because I think there's lots of folks who can probably relate once they understand what it is.
Yeah, this is where my psychologist piece comes in. But we especially in the US, we are very much kind of aligned with our careers. So if you think about, you know, after you meet somebody, one of the first things they ask is, where do you work, or what do you do, or what's your title? And so this gets very intertwined with our identity. And when we're thinking about making a switch, even if we don't like what we do anymore, or we're bored, or it's toxic, we kind of don't want to let go of that identity. So if I'm an attorney, for example, but I want to move into product marketing, I still start introducing myself as an attorney. And of course, what I'm saying by that is essentially, I'm not what you're looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's you might as well just start with that line. But I think when you break it down and you start looking underneath that title or that label that you've given yourself or you've aligned with, you start realizing all of these transferable skills and very valuable marketable skills that you have. And so I encourage people to start introducing themselves and to start viewing themselves as the value you bring to the market versus the firm you work for or the title that you've been given. Because when you identify with the value you bring to the market, you start to see all of these other options and possibilities that you didn't see before. Because if you're an attorney and maybe you work with clients and you're really good with uncovering problems, or you're really good at negotiating, or you're really good at understanding very technical language and how to distill it for a customer, those are very transferable skills that you can use in a variety of industries that other people will find valuable. So that's what I think we all need to do, Renessa. We need to start looking at ourselves as more complex, because we are very complex.
Yeah, no, I think it's critical, because for some folks, it's hard to find their place. Like I have conversations with folks sometimes, and the biggest challenge for them is being in a networking like situation, where a happy hour or something, where you have to introduce yourself and tell me what you do, and people, and especially if they're in between roles or what have you, they don't know what to say, because, well, I can't say that I am an analyst of da 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 da, or that I'm the SVP of this or that or the other. Like, you don't have the title. And so that can create a tremendous amount of insecurity, which, to your point, you're not your title, you're not your job. You really are the value that you bring. And I'm a firm believer, the marketplace doesn't pay for your pedigree, it doesn't pay for your passion or even your skill necessarily. It pays for the value that you're able to contribute with that combination of things that you have. And if we can't articulate the value, we're in a world of hurt. I think on the other flip side of identity, because this whole series is about redesigning your success, and for a lot of people, that pivot, whether it's a pivot into a career or a pivot into a business, looks different than what they've been spent the last decade or whatnot creating. And so if we're so tied to, well, I have my MBA and I am, X, Y, or Z, then when you find that role that really is your sweet spot, that really does light you up, that really does sing to you, there is a reluctance and all kinds of resistance that comes because, well, it didn't look like what I thought I was supposed to be. And so now you're confused, which you're really not confused. You got some identity stuff that you're dealing with. And so it makes the entire switch so much more difficult, because there's a piece of you that's tied to something that may or may not even be real for you anymore. Right?
We get in our own way is what we're doing. Essentially, we're getting in our own way and we're giving our power away. And again, I know this series is all about really like claiming your power and when you give a title to yourself, you basically are giving permission for the other person to define what that word means to them. And it may be what you want, but chances are it's not what you want, or it's a small sliver of what you want. And I think this is where it comes back to claiming your power. When you introduce yourself with your value and you view yourself as your total value of all the things you've done, all paid or not paid, volunteer, education, everything you bring to the table, you reclaim that power and you are the one communicating what you want to communicate versus allowing someone else to determine what that means to them.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned paid or unpaid. Because when we're switching, oftentimes, by virtue of a switch, the definition, you're switching into something that you're not currently being paid to do, right? And so I think many of us can dismiss the value of what we do outside of the role that we get a check for, or we get, direct deposit every couple of weeks for, and not recognize that there's a lot of value that can be communicated and conveyed with work that may not be directly tied to what you currently get paid for. So I think that's important. What are some of the fears? Because a lot of times switching is more mindset than anything. The execution is not easy, but it's simple. It's not complicated. Like you can do what you need to do. The complication happens really in the mindset and how people think about it. So what are some of the fears that you see commonly conveyed by folks who are thinking about switching, in the process of switching, whatnot?
Yeah, most people are, and this is a human phenomenon. We have this idea of loss aversion. We don't like loss, and so when we have something, we kind of cling tightly to it. And so a lot of people are afraid, especially if you've done very well in your career or you've earned a reputation. A lot of people are afraid that I'm going to look silly, or I am going to lose my status, or people are going to laugh at me, or, I'm going to fail. And, the fact is that we all are going to have to reinvent ourselves. If you have any length of time left in your career, I can almost promise you what you're doing today is going to look very different 5 years from now, whether it's technology or new policies or needs in the market, globalization. All of these things are going to change. And if you're resistant to changing, it's going to be forced upon you. So I think there's 3 things people are learning from this pandemic experience, Renessa, which are, one, job security is a myth. And that's always been the case. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people who like to believe if they're with a big company or, a company that's been around for a while, then they are secure. We know that's not true. The market is shifting so much faster than it was just 6 months ago. So if you thought you could ride out the next 5 years and keep doing what you're doing without having to think about this pandemic has really changed that. Yeah. And I think the last thing that has surprised people is that even stellar performers are being laid off and furloughed. Yeah. And again, not something new, but it's something that more and more people are noticing around them. So if you believed that stellar performance is enough, now that has been shattered. So when you think about these fears, fear of change versus what we're seeing happening in the market, in my opinion, it's less scary to take advantage of what's going on right now and proactively make that change than to see what's happening and recognizing that I could be subject to this. I could be a stellar performer and still get furloughed or still get laid off. And so this is why I encourage people to really consider working on your brand, being visible, building their connections, recognizing that the more conversations you have and the more understanding you have where the market's going, the more that you can continue to grow with that. And I think a lot of people who have not done this, that seems scary too. Yeah. But honestly, think about what you've already accomplished over the last few months without probably even trying too hard. You've probably grown in your resilience tenfold, because we've been experiencing extreme ambiguity, and just functioning day to day has caused you to need to build your resilience and resourcefulness. For a lot of us, we've had to figure out, maybe where you're going to get your unemployment check, or how you're going to change your routine in order to be more safe outdoors, or whatever it is. But our resourcefulness, we've gone to new websites, we've had different conversations with our service providers, we've made different choices. We've also probably connected with a lot more people over the last few months because we've had time where we wanted to check in with people. We've probably learned a lot of new technology. Again, maybe not consciously going online and taking a course, but just because Zoom has become the center of communications, or because now you needed to get on a social media to connect with people in different ways. So we're already doing this. And I want people to stop and take a moment to just recognize how much you've done in the last few months towards this effort. And when you do that, you could say, wow, I am already doing this. Yeah. And now it's just about maybe doing it in a more organized manner.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because when we think about redesigning your success, some of that happens by force. Like, sometimes you are pushed off the ledge and sometimes you get to jump, right? And so some people that listening in, you're being forced to redesign, either because of furloughs or because of shifts or reorgs within your company, or because of the uncertainty and insecurity around what the business holds for you and whether or not there'll still be a role for you in that company, right? I have a client that, and it happens at all spectrums of the salary band. It's not
Yes.
just something that's happening at the lower end. I have a client, $400,000 a year, and is redesigning, her success. And she's actually been great because she's been driving the process. She's seen the writing on the wall. And she's decided to really get in front of that, but she's doing that at the upper end of the salary spectrum. And then there are those of you who are at a place where you get to choose. And when Dawn talks about some of the fears and those kinds of things that hold people back, one of the things that landed with me was this idea of ego. And, am I going to look silly, or am I taking a step back, or am I going to lose status? And for a lot of high achieving women, you have degrees, you have a certain expectation of who you should be or what you want to call yourself. Or I'm the senior director of XYZZZ. And when you start to think about your perfect work, the place that you're called to really make a difference, it's like, but that's not nearly as sexy as, my, multi six-figure whatever. And it's so interesting because I have a client who's an amazing woman, and for her, she has a storied career in engineering, so she has a technical background. What she really wants to do is make a difference in the culture of companies and the culture of organizations, which is much more of kind of an HR play. When you're talking about, culture, when you're talking about getting the right people in the right roles, we talk about well-being, that kind of thing. And so when she came to me, that was kind of where she wanted to go. And she was trying to figure out, well, how do I get there? Maybe I need to step out and switch. Like, she would have been perfect candidate for what Dawn is doing, because she was looking to make this radical switch into a space that she didn't have a reputation in. Fast forward, her company ends up doing kind of a rotation, and they rotated her. And lo and behold, the opportunity that opened up for her was an opportunity in HR, where she would actually be able to, in an environment she'd been in for 20 years, actually start to play in this space and add value in this space, in a place where she already had an established reputation. It wasn't like she's going out having to prove herself externally. Here comes the resistance. Well, HR is kind of soft relative to like the engineering chops that she was accustomed to, right?
Her brain is evil.
Right? And so when you probe into the resistance, it was ego. It was like, but I don't know if, like, is that really nearly, and this is no pun, for all the folks that are listening, like, wait a minute, what you talking about HR? HR is great. And it is. From her perspective, though, it felt like a step down. It felt like it wasn't nearly as challenging as what she'd gone through in undergrad and graduate school. And as an engineer myself, I know how rigorous those, that curriculum can be, and it's not for the faint of heart. But what was so interesting for a lot of us when we're thinking about switching, a lot of times it's not about the switch, it's about our perception of who we are and our identity around doing the thing that makes our heart sing, versus the pride and all of the cachet that comes with perhaps our plan A, And so I want to put that out there for a lot of you to really begin to think about that. And again, she's amazing, and she is doing incredible things in this space, but it took her working through that. And so for some of us, we have to weigh our ego with our desire,
very much
so with our fulfillment, and see which one weighs more. And if the ego is winning out, we could really be missing out on some great opportunities, and making the road a whole lot harder, and creating a whole lot of unnecessary drama, simply because we got some identity issues going on around what we think is great and what we think is not, and all this other kind of stuff. So
it's so true. We have to stop pleasing everybody else and worrying about what everybody else thinks, and go for what is going to make us truly happy, because that is exactly what gets in people's way.
Absolutely. So you talk about, and this whole idea of switching, for a lot of women in particular, sometimes you're switching into a role where you may not have all of the experience at level 10 that they're asking for. And, there's the common joke that goes around, that men, if they're considering a role, if they got 3 out of 10, they're like, yep, I'm applying.
Yeah.
And women are trying to check off all the boxes, and if they're missing anything, they're like, no, I don't know if I'm qualified, this or that. But the reality is that sometimes we don't have all of the qualifications. Like, that's a fact. Doesn't mean we can't do the job. Doesn't mean we can't step into it. But the fact is we don't have all of the relevant experience. What do we do in those moments when we don't? How do we manage for that? And how can we progress in the career switch when there is a gap of some kind?
So I love that you brought that up, because actually it's not even a joke. It's actually true. There's research on this that men will apply to a job if they have 60% of the qualifications, and women will wait till they have 100%. But there's also research that shows that on average, most people who are hired have about 60% of the qualifications. And if we're going to move into the realm of referrals and getting hired through your network, that number can even drop lower. So I think knowing some of the facts, as I kind of put my behind the scenes recruiter hat on, is really helpful. Here's the deal. There is no perfect candidate. And in the same way, you're not going to find maybe the ideal job in terms of the exact pay or the exact commute you want or all of that. I mean, the aim is always to get as close as possible, but the company cares about somebody who's going to come in, hit the ground running, make the hiring manager and department look good, and not need a lot of hand-holding. Beyond that, what difference does it make if you have 10 years of sales experience or not, if you can come in and do those things? And I think that's where both sides get hung up. So another insider secret that might be helpful for people to know is that a lot of job descriptions are really not based on performance measures that you're going to be evaluated against inside the company. So we automatically think that there's some kind of magical or organized way of putting together this job description, when if you look at them, most of them have the same thing: strong communicator, self-starter, and just words on a piece of paper. And so what I would say to people is a couple of things. One, you're not going to have every qualification. So maybe look at the top 2 or 3 and say, hey, do I have some of these things that I can bring to the table? The other thing is that if you have a referral, or if you can get a person in your network to put your resume in front of the hiring manager, which is something I recommend for anybody, then you are ready going in with a positive check mark on your list. Because what hiring managers know is, one, they don't like to hire. It takes them away from their day job, and it takes a lot of time, and they really just want to get that job filled with somebody who hits those requirements I mentioned a few minutes ago. And then 2, they know that they're going to have to do some training anyway on how the company works and does certain things. But what's harder to change later are those, what we call soft skills, but I think they're the most critical skills, which are a positive attitude, or somebody who can think critically, or who is going to come in and be able to communicate well with a variety of different departments and people. So if you have these things, they say, I've heard studies that say 90% of skills are transferable and 10% are actually more specific. So when we start to really think about these numbers, even if they're a little bit off, the fact is that nobody's 100% qualified. And if we want to do something, if we can break down, again, our title or years of experience into more of the value we bring to the market, if we can understand the hiring manager's pain points and then connect those two, this is the value I bring and how it's going to solve your pain points, a hiring manager is going to say, great, you've got this.
What's interesting about what you just said is this idea that the hiring manager really wants you to be it. Like, they do. They want it about going through 20 rounds of people. They're like, I hope she's it. Because then we could just call this a day.
Really? They don't want to go through 20 people.
And so going in, like, particularly if you get an interview, if you get a phone screen, there's already this predisposition that, okay, she's got some qualifications. I think we think there's some promise here. So you're already in the black in a good way, right? And so part of it has to do with how much do you want it, and how much are you willing to demonstrate that you'll do what it takes to be able to either close a gap, step over a gap, go under a gap, that the gap isn't even important, And so oftentimes when we shared this in another interview with Romy Newman with Fairy God Boss, it's the person with the most certainty wins often.
Mm-hmm.
So in a conversation, if Dawn and I are having a conversation about whatever, and she might be concerned about some aspect of what I'm bringing to the table, my certainty can totally win her over. If I'm coming in and I'm insecure about that gap, or if I'm insecure about my position, my insecurity is going to add to her concern, right? Because it's a big decision. A hiring decision is huge. And if you get that wrong, it costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time, it costs a lot of, so it's a big deal. But oftentimes it's certainty, and I could be certainly wrong. And there are people who are certainly wrong in politics or wherever, but they are certain, and they can mobilize people around them because of that certainty, right? Mm-hmm. And so as you start to think about where your gaps might be, it's really important to understand you've got to get convinced that that gap doesn't prevent you from doing the role well, and that the other things that you bring to the table can compensate for that gap, and that you're able to then figure out how to tie it up, right? You've got to have that in your mind. But if you're going in there with that insecurity, it's going to get projected all day long. But the reality is that hiring manager is hoping you're it, because the last thing they want to do is take another hour out of their week to be able to then talk to some folks that aren't the right one. So you have to have somebody on your case.
Yeah, I say confidence breeds confidence. And I will tell you that when clients are making a switch, the first question I ask them is, do you believe you can do this job well? And the second they say yes, I'm like, that is all I need to know. That is all I need to know, because it doesn't matter then if you have the other, exact skill sets that they want or number of years doing whatever. If you believe you could do this job well, you will. And, you'll be resourceful. You'll figure out what you need to learn, and you'll figure it out when you get on the job. So that's all I need to know. Confidence breeds confidence.
Yeah. You talk about this idea of the plan A in your book.
Mm-hmm.
What is the plan A, and why is it so important when it comes to career switching?
Yeah, and this is part of that confidence breeds confidence, because here's the deal. I hear a lot of people when they know they don't want to do what they're doing now, but they're not sure what they want to do. They come to me and they say, I will do this, or I will do this, or I'll move anywhere, or I'm industry agnostic, but this is the function I want to do. And I say, you've got to really understand your plan A, and your plan A is your specific job search target. So the function, the industry, where you want to do that work, what types of companies, what types of cultures you want to work in, what size company you want to be in, a startup or a large national organization. So you need to understand all these things, because the fact is, this is what a hiring manager is looking to know. The most important question they're going to ask you is, why do you want this job? Yeah. And if you can't articulate an answer that's logical, compelling, and calms their nerves that you're not going to leave in 6 months, or you just need this job because you're desperate for a paycheck or for whatever reason, then that's the answer they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who is dedicated, has thought through it, has committed to this career path, knows why they want to do it, knows why they want to do it with this company. And so that's going to breed confidence, not just in the hiring managers, but in your network as well. Because, your network can't help you if they don't know what you want to do. It's the equivalent of saying, can you help me find an apartment? And I say, sure, what are you looking for? Well, I don't know. Well, where are you looking? I don't know. Yeah. Well, what's your price range? I don't know. I mean, I can't help you then. Yeah. So having a clear plan A, knowing exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it, is going to help you get where you want to be, because your network will be more confident in helping you, and the hiring manager will be more confident that you've made a thoughtful decision about why you want this job.
Yes, absolutely. Nothing becomes dynamic until it becomes specific.
I love that.
And that a mentor of mine would say it all the time. I'm trying to remember who said it. I can't remember, but I just owned it. And now it's like mine, but it's not mine. It didn't come from me. But it's I say it all the time.
Fantastic.
Because and that's been a thread throughout this series around being very specific about what you want. I often will say design with the end in mind. That is mine. That one's mine. But if you know what the end game is, then you'll know whether or not the steps that you're taking or the role that you're looking for and all that is going to fulfill that. But Dawn makes a great point about, especially with your network, it's unbelievable how many times people will ask for support and then they make it so difficult for their network to help them. And you put it on the other person to figure out your qualities, or you put it on the other person to figure out what to say, to introduce you. Like when I'm advising folks and they're looking to have their network make an introduction or make a connection, I tell them, okay, ask so-and-so, if they're willing to connect you with such and such. And to make it easier for you, I have put together some language or some scripting that literally you can just copy and paste, change it if you want. But if this makes it easier for you, feel free. And literally, like 99% of the time, the person is like, thank you.
Yeah.
We want to help you, but the added challenge of then having to figure out how to package you becomes a problem. And then you wonder why people haven't followed up, why they haven't actually made the introduction, why it's 2 weeks later and you're feeling awkward about following up and asking them if they did it and this and that. Like, you put yourself in that position, not because the person doesn't want to help, but because you've made it difficult for them to help you, because you're not specific about what you want. How can they help? What introduction can they make? Who can they connect you to? What types of companies are you looking for? What type of role? What type of this or that? So being very specific is really important, even though sometimes it can feel like, right, Dawn, that if I'm narrow, then I might not have enough opportunity. Like if I'm too specific, then I'm restricting myself. So I want to be open. Well, open is real nondescript. And oftentimes the more broad you are, the less opportunity comes your way, because it's very difficult for someone to have an opportunity and think, oh, this is for Dawn, or oh, Dawn needs to know about this, or oh, I should connect Dawn to this person, because Dawn is way too broad. So
yeah, and I will tell you, open does the exact opposite. It does. I agree with you. You need to do the work for them. Open makes the person you're asking for help do the majority of the work, because now they don't have a frame to work within. Open makes you seem like you've not invested enough thought into the process before asking for help.
Yep.
The other thing is, I've never worked with somebody or networked with somebody who asked me for specific help and was very clear and very articulate around how they've gone through this thought process and what they want to do. And if I have something that doesn't exactly fit, I still will probably offer it to them, because I can tell they're going to be a great hire. Now, they could turn that down, but I think the more specific you are, the more invested people want to be in you, because they see you've invested in you, and they're going to open the door and bring you a lot of opportunities for that purpose. So I totally agree with you, Renessa. I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of people who go in and say I'm industry agnostic, well, guess what? The person who's worked their entire life in that industry doesn't really feel good about you saying that.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, because the brilliance that you bring to this process is this unique intersection between the recruiting side of you and the psychology side of you. And so your book incorporates lots of psychological principles that I think are important for people to understand as they're going through the search process. What are some of those principles? Like pull back the curtain, let us get into the mindset of hiring managers that are assessing us. What do people need to know about that human being on the other side of the desk?
Yes, great question. And I love sharing this, because especially as someone who used to be a recruiter, I want to give people every advantage of getting that job. And I think we've already talked about some of them. I think, first off, knowing that the hiring manager doesn't really want to spend their time interviewing and hiring. They want a candidate who can come in, understand their pain points, and share specifically with supporting information how they're going to solve those pain points. They don't need to know more than that. Yeah. I think the other thing we need to recognize is that, we assume that hiring managers are trained, that the questions they're asking us are valid or fair. And, I'll be the first to tell you that most hiring managers are not trained to hire or interview. And this is a really important thing to understand. And this is not a slam on hiring managers. The fact is they may hire 2, 3, 4 people a year. So, they're not going to go through hours of training for something they do, so little time. I think they should, but that's another podcast. But, but because they're not trained, what I think is so important for candidates to do is to recognize you may not be asked the questions you hope to get asked, want to get asked, or if you're later in the process, you might get a better interview because the interviewer is getting better asking questions as it goes along. So, and so, there's obviously a lot of different things going on in the mind, like, halo effects and all these other kind of psychological terms that actually you don't need to talk about the terms, but the fact is interviewing last can have a great benefit. Interviewing first can have a great benefit. You don't have control over a lot of these things. So when you wipe all that off the table and say, what do I have control over? What you do have control over is recognizing that no matter what you're asked, no matter if your interview is 10 minutes or 10 hours, or, if your interviewer is not skilled at all, that you have to leave on the table the information that person needs to make a good decision about you and your value to that department, because you may not get asked the questions you hope to get asked. And you can leave and you could say, well, that wasn't fair, and they didn't ask me about this project, or I really wanted to talk about this, but none of that matters once you don't get the job. So I very much encourage you as a job seeker to be very clear about the pain points that your hiring manager has, to be very clear about the values, accomplishments, achievements that you bring to the table, and to be very clear about the fact that regardless of those questions you're asked, you need to find a way, whether it's in your tell me about yourself answer, or that you communicate this information during that time frame.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly 100% agree with everything that you said. And I'm a firm believer that it's your responsibility to tell the market how to interpret your experience. Like it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm communicating to my clients or to the market or prospects what's different about me, what's unique about me, what value I bring. And because you're right, there is no interview 101 class. Like your hiring manager, they are really great and really brilliant at the job they were hired to do, which was not, interviewing you necessarily, right? But one way that you could do that, obviously Don has talked about the tell me about yourself. Like a lot of times we blow it there because we're so vanilla in the tell me about ourselves that it doesn't really have a lot of teeth. But another strategy that could be helpful as you're talking about accomplishments or value that you have, you've added. Sometimes people call them SAR stories, some people call them source stories, they're called all kinds of different things. But a lot of times the mistake that people make is they just tell the story and they leave it there. Like, okay, well, I did this and I, increased efficiency by 20% and, brought the team and we did it under budget and blah, blah, blah. And you leave it there and you think I've demonstrated my value. Well, you've demonstrated an accomplishment, but not necessarily influenced how that person perceives the value of that thing, because you're the person who was behind the scenes. You're the person that worked on the project for 6 months. You're the person who knew all the hiccups and challenges with the vendor and this and that. Like you are privy to all that. The person who's listening to your bullet pointed accomplishment was not. And so you can tell your story. And at the end of the story, you could say, Don, one thing you may not know about me is that I have this way of just bringing cohesion out of chaos. Like I can take the most dysfunctional team, I can get them mobilized, get them behind a vision, and get them cranking. And the reason I shared this example is because I think it's a perfect illustration of my ability to do that, right? That's one way where you get to then take responsibility for how that person interprets what you said, because I may listen to your accomplishment and I may have a different interpretation of what the value was. I might think, oh, well, yeah, she's really process driven. Same example, but I take away process driven. I don't necessarily take away leader who can bring cohesion out of chaos, right? But if you tell me that's what I'm supposed to take out of it, then I walk away. And when we're talking about all the candidates, I'm like, well, what I like about her is that she can really bring a dysfunctional team together. And we've got a dysfunctional team. She might be the person who can do that for us. It's just one way of you being able to figure out, because Dawn's point is right. It's not fair. Sometimes you get a good interviewer. Sometimes you get somebody who'll pull stuff out of you. Sometimes you'll get a person who's totally stonewalls you. Doesn't matter. You're still responsible for what presentation you leave behind, because you don't get the do-over, right? And so that's one way of being able to do exactly what she says, because it's not fair. But you mentioned oftentimes, Dawn, that what are the questions that interviewers and hiring managers are asking themselves about you? Because their decision to hire you is such a risky decision. Like, you can't just, we hired somebody, and then if it doesn't work out, well, we'll just, like changing a pair of shoes. Like, it's a big deal. So what's going on in their minds that we need to know about so that we can anticipate and ensure that we're making the best performance possible?
Yeah, I think hiring managers want to bring somebody on the team who's, quite frankly, not going to be a headache to them. Need their hand held with every shift in strategy, or need to, can't be resourceful enough to figure things out. I think hiring managers want somebody who upholds their reputation, so it's going to look good in front of the client or in front of their boss, and who is going to be proactive, somebody that the hiring manager doesn't have to worry about, constantly check up on. Did they follow through? Did they do this? So I think there's a lot of things that, again, are not necessarily tied to the exact necessarily technical skills you bring, but a lot of your approach to work, which is why that fit is so important. So a lot of these intangible things. And this is where I think a referral can be so useful, because a referral cuts through a lot of those doubts that a hiring manager might have, or a lot of those unknowns, because we assume, again, that a hiring manager is going to check out their assumptions, or that they're going to read the resume. I mean, here's the thing, right? I have yet to meet a hiring manager who's read a resume in full. If you get 10 seconds, that you're lucky for that. So I think when you think about it, so what if you don't have 10 years of sales experience and that's what they're asking for? Because you could have been a crappy salesperson. Just because you check that box doesn't mean that, that you're great at it. So I also think a couple of places where people can really impress the hiring manager that they sometimes don't really invest as much time in are the questions you ask at the end, because you really want to put time into making them insightful. You want to put time into making sure they continue to communicate the value you bring. You want to make sure that they show you're taking the information you're learning during the interview, thinking about it critically, and asking questions that benefit the department and the organization. So a lot of people come up with what do you like about working here? And not that that's a necessarily bad question, but it definitely is an impressive question. The other part, I think people tend to scramble at the end, that can actually be incredibly valuable, are the references. I think, to your point, when you talked about, prepping people to be your references, I think having 3 stellar references, because we know a neutral reference or, a mediocre reference is a bad reference. But having 3 stellar references who can communicate not only the value you bring, but if you do have a gap or you do have an area of concern that the hiring manager, may have, that your references can be a great way to close those gaps. So prepping them to say, hey, can you talk about the project we worked on here? Because it really shows my leadership skills. And I think that's a skill that's important to this job. So I think we have a lot more power and control over how the overall process goes than we sometimes realize. And we just need to take advantage and invest the time.
Yeah. I think one thing I loved what you said, or what I took from what you said, was this idea that it really is about them. Like,
it's always about them.
Always about them. The interview's not about you. It's not even about getting to know you. It's about, is this person going to embarrass me? Is this if I bring this person onto my team, is it going to make my job easier? Am I going to be able to shine? Am I going to be able to get promoted? Because in order for me to get to the next level, I've got to have a working team. And so to the extent that you're able to present your value from the perspective of how you're going to make them shine, how you're going to make it easier for them, how you're going to advance their agendas.
Yep.
You're much more inclined to be like, that's my girl, because we can do some things together, right? Because they have their own ambitions, they have their own priorities, and most people are trying to figure out what's in it for me. And your hiring manager is no different. They're a human being just like everybody else. The other thing that Don talked about was the questions. I love that, because what many people fail to realize is that the questions you're still selling.
Yeah.
It's still the sales process. Once they say, well, do you have any questions? Sell time is not over. It is actually just begun, because the questions you ask will give some insight onto, man, can I see this person as being part of our team? Yeah. As opposed to candidate X. Like, are you like huddled around the table, and can they see you as being part of the team that's rolling up your sleeves and trying to figure out the solution to this gnarly problem? And the questions that you ask will either set you up with that dynamic, or it'll continue to have you looking like candidate Joe, who's just trying to figure out how much vacation time she's going to get, right? Yep. But you mentioned certain questions, and I think that lots of questions are important, like the team dynamic and some of those other things, but those are questions that are important to you, for you to consider the job. And my advice, and Don, you can either pitch and catch or agree or disagree or give your thoughts, because I'd love to know. My perspective is, because it's not about you, save all of your personal questions of evaluation for when you get an offer. Like, sell yourself to the point where you can get the offer. Make your questions all about them and about the business and about the problems they're solving, and getting a handle on that. Because once you get an offer, then you can ask all of the me questions that are going to help me decide, is this the right fit for me? But get yourself in a position where you can make that decision, as opposed to wasting real estate, because questions are real estate. Don't waste real estate on some stuff that is not going to allow you to shine. Because
I totally agree. One of the things I coach people on, Renessa, is when they say, well, I don't know what questions to ask, I say, imagine it's your first or second day on the job. Yeah. Write a list of questions that you would ask. And those tend to be very company focused, very goal focused around what your job is.
Your orientation today.
If you kind of take that mindset of, I already got the job, what questions would I ask? I think you tend to write much more insightful questions. And you're right. From the second you determine what your plan A is, the entire job search process is about them. I love that you said that, because it's 100% true. And when you focus on it that way, then you get to the offer, and now you get to decide, this is something I want to, consider further.
Yeah, I just want to know how much flex time we have. And it's not the question to ask until you get. They don't want you yet. They don't want you yet.
They need to love you first.
They need to love you. And then when they love you, they're much more inclined for some of those smaller things to be able to negotiate, because, man, we want her. And so if there's a little, some kind of quirk that she has, that she needs to come in at 9 instead of 8:30 because she takes her kid to blah, 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 we can work with that, because we want you. But if you start putting that stuff up in the beginning, you sound like work. And we don't want you, sound like a problem.
Headaches. You sound like headaches to me.
Exactly. So we could go on forever, but we won't. And so I want to land this plane. And obviously, Don, you have a free gift for everyone that's listening. So I want to give you an opportunity to share that, so that then we can instruct people on how to be able to connect and follow you. So I'll yield the floor for you to share that.
Yeah, so the free gift that I'm going to offer to everybody is an excerpt from my book, and it's very aligned with what we talked about today. So it's perfect. It's about the 5 mental characteristics of successful switchers. And the great thing is we actually didn't cover these today, so it's going to be definitely bonus material for you to read about. But I think, to the point we've talked about, a lot of this process and what is helpful in success or failure on the way to becoming a switcher or pursuing your dream is what's happening inside our minds. And so that's why I thought this would be the perfect thing to share, because once you're in the right mindset, you are unstoppable.
Yeah, yeah. And so below this video, you'll see a link where you can click that link, enter your name and your email address, and then you can get access to that chapter in the book. I highly recommend it, especially if you are currently a switcher, but more importantly, if you're thinking about switching. If you think that at some point in the next year or two, like you've got that itching, and we all know what that itching feels like. And for some of us, it takes a long time for that itch to manifest into something we really want to scratch. But you be ready so that you don't have to get ready. Like, these are the things that you can start putting into place that will make a transition really seamless for you, that will make the process so much easier, because you're coming into the marketplace from a place of abundance and preparedness, and not from a place of scarcity and thirst, because nobody likes a thirsty job seeker. Nobody wants to help somebody who's just thirsty. And even if your job search and your switch is time sensitive, you can still come from a space of abundance, and you can still come from a space of detachment. So that's just the state of mind, but it's just harder to get there when you are physically in a space where, you've got pressure. So if you don't have that pressure, this is the time. It's one of those things that's super important, but not urgent. And so my hope is that this conversation has made it more urgent for you, so that you can take control of your career design and your career development and your progress, as opposed to being dragged about in reaction to a circumstance that's happened outside of you. But that being said, thank you, Dawn. It was such a privilege to have you. I always love dialoguing with you, and I appreciate the wealth and the richness of the work that you do. And so we appreciate you being a part of this conversation for sure.
Thank you so much, Renessa. This is such a great series, and I am so excited that you're doing this again, because it just is so helpful for everyone. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your motivation and inspiration.
Awesome. So with that, I will say on behalf of Dawn and myself that we wish you every success and happiness, whether you're career switching or not switching or whatever it is. Take control of your career, take control of your business, and we wish you well. So we'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye.
Bye.